Lieutenant Commander? What are you talking about? His voice was thin, brittle. I watched my father, Robert, a man who had built his entire world on the illusion of control, as his foundation simply turned to dust. He tried to puff out his chest, to summon the boardroom tyrant I'd known my whole life. "Don't you dare take that tone." He started, but the words just died in his throat. I stood there, perfectly still, letting the gold stripes on my service dress blue uniform catch the light. He had spent a lifetime trying to rank me, and in that moment he finally understood he didn't even know the game. But that stunning moment of clarity, that came much later. 6 months earlier, the world was a very different place, and my rank meant nothing in his house. It was a Sunday dinner, one of those command performances where the silverware is polished but the smiles are not. I finally worked up the courage to tell them about David, my fiancé, and our engagement. A heavy, immediate chill descended on the room. My mother, Helen, a woman who treated uncomfortable silence like a shield, just stared intently at her porcelain plate, refusing to meet my eyes. My father, however, didn't bother with subtlety. He let his fork clatter onto his plate, the sound echoing in the quiet dining room. "A soldier?" he sneered, the word dripping with a lifetime of condescension. He looked at me as if I'd announced I was joining a traveling circus. Our daughter, marrying into that. To him, the military wasn't a noble profession. It was a blue-collar trade, something for people without better options. It was just another entry in the ledger I kept in my head, right next to the college fund that quietly disappeared when my brother wanted a new car. The verdict came swiftly. There was no discussion, no room for debate. He stood up, throwing his napkin on the table like a gauntlet. "We will not have our family name associated with this mess. You will either call this thing off, or you will consider yourself unaffiliated with this family. Stay away from us." The words were cold, precise, and absolute. A business decision. I was a bad investment he was finally writing off his books. He turned and walked away without another word. He was done. The sting of it was sharp, but the practical fallout was a nightmare. A military wedding has traditions, deep-seated protocols. The bride's family isn't just for show. Their presence is a testament to support. Their absence isn't just noticed, it's questioned. My own commanding officer, a man who valued loyalty above all else, pulled me aside with a look of genuine concern. In my world, a stable family unit is considered a mission-critical asset, and mine had just publicly self-destructed, leaving me dangerously exposed and my reputation in question. My father tossed my wedding invitation onto his mahogany desk like it was a piece of trash, an invoice he had no intention of paying. He thought he was simply protecting his precious social standing, pruning a branch of the family tree he deemed unworthy. He had no idea he'd just disowned a lieutenant commander in naval intelligence. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To my family, my life was a footnote in a story they were writing about themselves. I remember one summer evening, the air thick with the smell of my father's expensive cigars, as he held a champagne flute aloft. He was giving a toast to my brother, Mark, the family's designated successor, who had just managed to network his way into a golf game with some minor local executive. My father beamed, speaking of legacy and building connections, his voice full of a pride he never once directed at me. The whole family applauded, their faces glowing with adoration for a victory so laughably small. Later that night, I tried to share my own news. I just received my acceptance into a highly selective advanced signals analysis program, something only a handful of officers were chosen for each year. I tried to explain the significance of it, the doors it would open. My father simply smiled, patted my head condescendingly and said, "That's nice, dear. Our little spy." Then he turned right back to Mark to discuss business strategy. My mother, noticing the flicker of pain in my eyes, just gave me that weak, familiar shrug. "You know how your father is about appearances," she whispered. "Mark's job is so much more straightforward." That was the narrative. I was the strange, incomprehensible hobbyist, while my brother was the heir to the throne. But the woman they saw at that dinner table, she wasn't real. She was a carefully constructed fiction, a role I played to survive the weekends and holidays. The real me lived in a world they couldn't even imagine, a world without windows, deep inside a secure facility known as a skiff. It was a sterile, silent place, illuminated only by the glow of monitors, where the only sound was the quiet hum of servers processing the whispers of the entire planet. This was where I wasn't a footnote. Here, I was the author. I'll never forget the tension during Operation Black Fog. A hostile submarine had gone dark in a strategic strait, a ghost that had slipped through our entire surveillance net. Panic was a low-frequency hum in the command center, but in the skiff, there was only cold, hard focus. The initial comment was thin. A single, corrupted cryptographic handshake that made no sense. The Elent parameters were all wrong for the subclass we were tracking, which meant it was either a ghost or something far worse, a new class of vessel we had no profile for. For hours, I lived inside the data, searching for the ghost in the machine. My commanding officer, Rear Admiral Thompson, a man whose grizzled face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, stood behind me. He didn't say a word, just watched the data flow across my screens, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't need to. His trust was a tangible thing in that silent room, a weight that was both a burden and a blessing. I cross-referenced thermal layers from satellite feeds with the corrupted signal's decay rate, running a probability analysis that felt more like witchcraft than science. And then I saw it. A shadow within a shadow, an acoustic anomaly so faint, the automated systems had dismissed it as a geological event. "Got it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I plotted the coordinates. The tension in the room didn't just break, it evaporated. Cheers erupted from the main command center over the comms. Admiral Thompson just placed a hand on my shoulder for a brief moment. "Good work, Commander," he said, his voice low and full of gravelly respect. That quiet nod from the Admiral. It was worth more than 1,000 of my father's champagne toasts. It was real. My family's dismissal wasn't born of malice, not really. It was born of a willful, stubborn ignorance. It was always about maintaining our standing. And a daughter with level 4 clearance and a rack of service ribbons didn't fit the narrative they'd constructed for their lives. "It wasn't a proper career for a woman of your background," my mother once said. They saw my uniform not as a symbol of immense responsibility, but as a costume. A strange uniform fetish, my father called it once. They couldn't see the reality because they had already decided on the fiction. For years, I had tried to speak their emotional language, but they only respected one thing: power. So I decided I would finally speak to them in the only language they understood: rank and irrefutable public validation. For a week after their ultimatum, my father's words, "Stay away from us," echoed in the quiet of my apartment. The initial sting of rejection slowly cooled, hardening into something else entirely. It became a cold, hard, tactical problem. Their public shunning wasn't just a personal wound. It was a professional liability. I saw the concerned glances from my colleagues, the subtle questions about my family situation. In my line of work, instability is a red flag, and my parents had just raised one the size of a billboard over my head. So I made a decision, not in a moment of anger, but with the same quiet, methodical focus I used to analyze enemy signals. This would not be an emotional confrontation. I wasn't going to plead for their love or demand an apology. That part of my life was over. This was a mission of narrative correction. The goal wasn't revenge, it was irrefutable vindication. I needed to establish a boundary so clear and so public that it could never be questioned again. I decided to treat my wedding not as a family affair, but as an information operation. My greatest asset was not a piece of technology, but a person. I made one crucial phone call to my former commanding officer, Vice Admiral Hayes, a man whose integrity was as legendary as his service record. I was careful with my words, framing the situation professionally. I explained that my family had chosen not to attend, and that their absence was creating an unfortunate ambiguity about my support system. I didn't ask for a favor, I simply stated the facts. He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and I knew he was reading between the lines, understanding everything I wasn't saying. He understood the language of power and perception perfectly. "I'll be there, Commander," he said, his voice firm, "and I'd be honored to offer a toast." He didn't need the messy details spelled out. He knew that in our world, a picture with a 3-star admiral is worth more than 1,000 words of gossip. He wasn't just attending as a guest, he was agreeing to be my character, witness, lending his considerable weight to my side of the scale. The trap was now perfectly set. On my wedding day, I moved with a calm sense of purpose. I gave our photographer a short, specific shot list. Not just the usual romantic poses, but strategic captures. The Vice Admiral laughing with my husband. The Vice Admiral shaking my hand, his expression one of paternal respect. And the centerpiece. The 3 of us at the cake-cutting ceremony. A perfect tableau of mentorship and legitimacy. Later that night, instead of just sharing photos with friends, I curated an album. I wrote captions filled with professional gratitude, tagged the official Navy Public Affairs pages, and chose the specific platforms where the photos would have the most impact. The final album was curated. The captions were written, each word chosen with surgical precision. The photos were ready to be deployed. My family thought they had exiled me to the fringe of their world. They had no idea they were about to be confronted with the reality of mine. Not by my invitation, but by the irrefutable evidence of my authority. My information operation worked faster than I could have ever imagined. The digital ripple spread from the official Navy Public Affairs page to military-centric blogs, and from there, it jumped into the civilian world. It found its way into university alumni groups and social circles my parents swam in, passed along by old acquaintances who were surprised and perhaps a little delighted to see this unexpected development. I can picture the moment of discovery perfectly. My mother, likely scrolling through her tablet at the breakfast table, casually browsing the updates of her friends. Then she would have frozen, her finger hovering over the screen. She would have squinted, confused, before calling my father over. And there I would be, on their screen, their disowned, disgraced daughter, looking radiant and happy in a stunning white dress. But it wasn't just me. Standing beside me, smiling with genuine warmth as we cut the cake, was Vice Admiral Hayes. A man whose face was recognizable in the circles they so desperately wanted to impress. The image was a declaration of war against their narrative. This wasn't the picture of a failure they had painted for themselves. This was a picture of someone respected, someone celebrated by the very kind of authority they worshipped. The public evidence was in direct conflict with their private fiction, and the evidence was irrefutable. His number flashed on my screen, the first time in 6 months. I let it ring 3 times, a small, deliberate assertion of control, before answering with a calm, "Hello." There was no greeting, no preamble, just the frantic, furious demand, "What is going on?" "My phone has been ringing all morning. People are asking questions." "What did you do?" He truly saw it as something I had done to him. In his mind, my success was nothing more than an inconvenient public relations crisis for the family. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was almost impressive. "We need to talk," he demanded, his voice tight with a lifetime of unchallenged authority. "Now. This is a mess, and you are going to help me clean it up." I let the silence hang for a moment, letting him feel the shift in the air. "I agree, we should talk," I finally said, my voice even and cool. He began to suggest a neutral location, but I cut him off. "I'll be at the house this evening. At 1900. I didn't ask. I informed him. The terms were mine. Pulling up to the house I grew up in felt different this time. This house had always been his castle, his throne room, the place where his word was absolute law. I had always entered it as a subject, a child, a disappointment seeking some scrap of approval. But not tonight. I took a deep, steadying breath, my gloved hands resting on the wheel. I wasn't wearing my weekend civilian clothes. I was in my full service dress blues, the dark jacket perfectly pressed, the gold stripes of a lieutenant commander gleaming on the sleeves. Each step from the car to the front door was deliberate. I was not a daughter coming home for a lecture. I was an officer arriving for a formal debriefing. My mother opened the door, and a small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. My father appeared behind her, his face a mask of stunned confusion. They led me into the living room, the very same room where he had pronounced my sentence of exile. He recovered first, falling back on his only defense, contempt. "Well, what's with the costume?" he sneered, gesturing vaguely at my uniform. "Is this some kind of pathetic joke?" I met his gaze without flinching. "This, father, is my uniform," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the room. I touched the stripes on my sleeve. "I am a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. I serve in the Office of Naval Intelligence." I then gestured to the neat rows of colored ribbons on my chest. "And these are not decorations. They are a record of my service." I pointed to one. "This is the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. It was awarded for my analytical work during a rather sensitive signals intelligence operation in the Persian Gulf." I indicated another. "This one is the Joint Service Achievement Medal for my contributions to a multinational counterterrorism task force." I spoke calmly, factually, laying out my career piece by piece. Each word was a carefully placed charge, dismantling the flimsy reality they had built around me. He was reeling, trying to process a decade of my life that he had willfully ignored. But he still had one pathetic shield left: denial. "You're making this up," he stammered. "That picture with that admiral. It was a fluke, a photo op." I almost smiled. This was the moment the entire operation had been built around. "A fluke?" I asked, letting the question hang in the air. "Vice Admiral Hayes is not just that admiral." I took a step closer, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "The Vice Admiral you saw in my wedding photos? He was my commanding officer during Operation Neptune's Shield." "The commendation medal I just showed you?" I paused, letting him absorb it. "He personally pinned it on my uniform. He respects my work, father." I held his gaze, delivering the final, devastating payload. "Unlike you." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world collapsing. I saw the color drain from my father's face. His posture changed, a lifetime of ingrained civilian pride collapsing under the sudden, shocking weight of military protocol. He looked small, shrunken, a deposed king sitting on a cardboard throne in his own living room. My mother simply stared, her hands covering her mouth, the full, catastrophic scale of their miscalculation finally dawning on her. He tried to speak, to stammer some defense. "We didn't know," he whispered, but his voice had no power left. It was the weak, hollow plea of a defeated man. I didn't need to say another word. My presence, my uniform, my quiet, unshakable confidence. They had already won the war. My father had spent my entire life teaching me the importance of rank. In the end, it only took 6 words for him to finally learn who outranked who. The silence in that living room was a living thing, heavy, absolute, and suffocating. It was the sound of a dynasty of 2 crumbling into dust. Then came the frantic, fumbling attempts to rebuild. My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "We didn't know. We didn't understand what you did." It wasn't an apology for her cruelty, but an excuse for her ignorance. My father, looking utterly defeated, tried to reframe the narrative. "If you had just told us. If you had been clearer." The blame, as always, was a boomerang he tried to send back in my direction. I listened to their words, and a strange sense of peace washed over me. I felt nothing. No surge of victory, no lingering sting of anger, just a profound and final emptiness, where the desperate need for their approval used to be. It was like listening to the excuses of strangers for a mistake that no longer concerned me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list their decades of slights and dismissals. The ledger was closed. I simply stood, my uniform feeling less like a statement and more like my own skin. My life and my career require my full focus, and a foundation of mutual respect, I said, my voice calm and steady. I will no longer allow anyone to undermine that foundation. I looked at them one last time, not as a daughter, but as a commanding officer concluding a debrief. "This conversation is over." Then, without another word, I turned, walked out the door, and never looked back. 1 year later, the name on my office door now read, Commander. I had been promoted, and with the promotion came the command of my own signals intelligence unit, the Aegis Analysis Wing. We were the Navy's tip of the spear in electronic warfare and cryptology, a team I had hand-picked myself. I was no longer just an analyst deciphering whispers in the static. I was a leader, responsible for the lives and careers of 30 elite sailors and officers. My name was no longer a secret, spoken only in secure rooms. It was now attached to the official reports on the Barents Sea incident and the South China Sea resolution, sanitized public records of quiet, critical victories. My legacy wasn't something I was waiting to receive anymore. It was something I was building every single day in the code and signals that guarded the nation. The very concept of family had completely redefined itself for me. It was no longer a group of people bound by blood and obligation, but by purpose and trust. My family was now the hum of the command center at 0300, working a developing situation in the Pacific. It was the fierce debate with my lead analyst, a young lieutenant with brilliant, unconventional ideas, as we hammered out a threat assessment. It was the shared look of grim satisfaction with my team after a successful 12-hour operation fueled by bad coffee and an unbreakable sense of shared duty. This was a family founded on competence. Here, respect wasn't a gift given by a patriarch, it was a currency, earned through merit and paid to those who had proven their worth. The loyalty in these rooms was real, forged in pressure and mutual reliance. And it was the support I had unknowingly craved my entire life. The inevitable message came on a quiet Tuesday morning, a single notification ping on my encrypted terminal. It was an email from my mother. The subject line just said, "Thinking of you." The message itself was a tentative, meandering thing, full of trivial family updates, questions about my well-being, and a final, hopeful, "It would be lovely to catch up sometime." A few hours later, a text from my father followed. It was more direct, stilted. "Heard about your promotion to commander. Congratulations." It was an olive branch, a test to see if the door I had so firmly closed had been left unlocked. I read the words, and they felt like artifacts from a distant past, from a life that belonged to someone else. There was no spike of pain, no flicker of old anger, not even a ghost of a desire to respond. The emotional charge was gone. I understood with perfect, peaceful clarity that they weren't reaching out to the daughter they had disowned. They were attempting to connect with the commander they had discovered. Their validation was a currency that no longer had any value in my world. My finger hovered over the message. I didn't archive it for later. I just hit delete, and the past vanished without a sound. I turned back to the mission briefing on my main screen, my real life, my real work, and didn't give them a second thought. My father believed a legacy was something you inherit. I learned a true legacy is something you build in silence, and have acknowledged in public, not for their approval, but for my own peace. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.